everyone, and welcome to the Crown Report from Royal News Network. My name is Brittany, and on this program, we talk about some of the major royal news stories of the week. We have Prince William touring the Duchy of Cornwall and letting everyone know that Catherine is doing well. In fact, she just recently oversaw a report revealing the connection between early childhood years and business. We have King Charles, of course, getting back to work and handing over the reins as Colonel in Chief to the Army Air Corps to his son, Prince William. We have the state visits between Denmark and Sweden and Denmark and Norway, and a lot of discussion about the state of King Frederick and Queen Mary's marriage. But the main story we're going to talk about today is what to do when you are a minor royal, because we have some absolute stars who are working royals and fulfill that more minor role. They don't get as much press attention, but they do an absolutely fabulous job. We're looking at you, Princess Anne, and of course, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, who's becoming a real star of the British monarchy. But then we also have the spares who, let's just say, are less than desirable. I'm thinking of Prince Harry, of course, and we have a new story about Prince Laurent of Belgium, who is, you could say, rather petulant in his role as the spare. So we will discuss all these things today as part of the Crown Report. But if you guys haven't been here, you are free to give a follow. This is, again, a podcast that tries to cover so much of the major royal news stories that happen every week. But let's begin, because it is hard to be the spare. Let's be fair, because you are so close to the throne and yet a little bit so far. And that is really challenging for so many. So there really needs to be a class of how to be a royal spare, because whether it's hubris, a wounded ego, or just simple narcissism, royal spares can either be the monarchy's greatest asset or its greatest liability. So we have some great spares, of course. Like I said, Princess Anne, who is the workhorse of the British monarchy, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, and her husband, Prince Edward, who keep going from strength to strength. It really seems like we have Prince Carl Philip in Sweden, who is a very much strong support for his sister, Crown Princess Victoria, and the King Carl Gustaf. We have Prince Constantine of the Netherlands, who still supports his brother, King William Alexander, and just doesn't seem to put a step out wrong too much, although his daughter is trying to be an influencer, and that is rather interesting. We also have Princess Madeline of Sweden, who left some of the drama, you could say, that she was experiencing in Sweden to live in the United States. And we have Princess Caroline of Monaco and Prince Joachim of Denmark. So many great spares, but of course, you have some greatness, and then you also have some pretty terrible spares as well. Obviously, Prince Harry is number one on everyone's list. We also have Prince Laurent, who you will meet and learn more about. We also have Princess Martha Louise, who speaks to angels and marrying a shaman, many who think is a bit of a con man. We have Prince Andrew, of course, as well, and Infanta Cristina, whose husband spent time in prison. So the brother-in-law of the current king of Spain and the son-in-law of the former king of Spain spent time in prison for financial fraud. So many challenging roles, because let's be honest, in a royal family, it's just so hard by just simple accident of birth, something you can't control. You are this close to the throne and yet so far away at the same time. But I think the true test always is understanding your limits within the system and carving out a role for yourself that really makes you shine. Princess Anne, of course, is a great example of that, because she does all the bread and butter royal engagements without fuss, without muss. She has continued as the workhorse of the monarchy. She does the highest number of engagements pretty much every year. She's never really beaten, because she goes to all the small things that most other royals either maybe don't really want to do or just don't really have the flexibility to do as king or the Prince of Wales. Because when a monarch goes to an event or the immediate heir, it does require a lot more security, preparations, those sorts of things. But Princess Anne can do some of those other roles that the royals really, really need. And this is resulted in her having the honor to serve as her brother's gold stick in waiting during his coronation, which essentially means that she served as a ceremonial bodyguard to the king. And I think that is so incredibly impressive, even in the official coronation pictures. On the dais where people started standing and then there were steps descending down, obviously the more minor royals were on the floor, but you could see as people got up higher on the steps to determine their hierarchy within the system. And it was surprising to me very, very much that Prince William and Catherine were not right next to the king and queen at the same level. It was, in fact, Princess Anne and her husband, Sir Timothy Lawrence. So, looking back at the coronation, you can just see how Princess Anne has really, really become just such a shining beacon of light of what a spare is supposed to be. Because a spare is there to support their sibling. And yes, somewhat it is a thankless role sometimes, but we've had a little bit of an interesting poll result, which has shown that the person with the least amount of dislike within the royal family is not the senior members. It's Princess Anne and the next person on our list, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. They both sit currently at 13% unfavorability. Now, they are not as high as some of the other royals in terms of favorability, but just being at 13%, it's actually really, really good when you think about it. And she has really become Sophie, the rising star, because she did sort of a backwards and forwards. She was in Scotland, then she was in Italy. Now she's back in Scotland. And we covered a couple of weeks ago how she was the first British royal to visit Ukraine while it remains in a state of war. And she brought a message from King Charles to Ukrainian President Zelensky. And this is very critical because what I always want to promote, especially within these programs, is a greater understanding of the role that royals function as. Royals are head of state, at least the monarch is, and everybody underneath them also is an adjutant, a representative of the head of state. So when a royal comes and visits a place, there's the expectation that they will be treated in a certain way, particularly if they're working royals, if they're not obviously very different. But if you're working royals, there's an expectation of how you will be treated because you represent the head of state of a government that many people around the world, many countries around the world, want a good relationship with. And that, of course, is the United Kingdom. You can get great trade relationships. And obviously, in the case of Ukraine, because of the war going on, they want to keep the relationship with the UK as tight as possible because this gives them a greater opportunity to continue their efforts against Russia. And we've covered as well, I think we did on this program, and I've covered in videos on Royal News Network that there was a report that came out that it was, in fact, Russian bots that may have been pushing some of the where is Catherine, where is Kate agenda. And the reason for that is that if you destabilize the head of state of a country and the people who are attached to that head of state, you might destabilize the country overall. So royals again fulfill this function. They are not celebrities because as we will talk about with Prince Harry, Harry and Meghan tried to meld the two, which damages the institutions overall because royals are not celebrities. Yes, they are covered somewhat in the same sphere, but they are not celebrities. And so Sophie again fulfills this so well. She also recently oversaw the ceremony of the keys at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, Scotland, with her husband, Prince Edward. This is usually done when the monarch spends 1 week at the palace in July. But in another instance, it is held at the start of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, which was the case in this instance. And so I believe Catherine and William oversaw this just a couple of years ago. And it also seems like Sophie took over what was going to be Catherine and William's tour in Italy. If you remember correctly, before obviously it came out about Catherine's cancer diagnosis and need for surgery and everything, which again shows you because I feel like the news came out in late December, early January that they were going to do this tour. Maybe November, December, I think we had heard about the possibility of this tour. I always like to remind people that even though the official statement from the palace said planned, that could mean it was planned within a week's time because there were schedules, there were plans out in place for Catherine and William that they basically had to entirely abandon because of Catherine's surgery and then later cancer diagnosis. And so I just want to make that clear for people who have never experienced really surgery because they think planned, they think, oh, they planned it 3 or 6 months in advance. No, those type of things happen, but generally a lot of times surgery, it's not emergency where they need to wheel them in immediately or else the person will die. No, this was just, it needed to be done very, very quickly, but they were able to give her some time to prepare. So, all that to say, it seems like most likely because supposedly going to be in May that this tour occurred, seems like Sophie actually stepped in for what was going to be William and Catherine's tour of Italy because she was there to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Monte Cassino. And so this was a battle fought as sort of a stepping stone towards D-Day in Normandy, also known as the Battle of Rome. It is described as a series of 4 military assaults by the Allied nations in their attempt to break through what they called the Winter Line, which was basically a direct route to Rome. If they could break through this line, they had a direct highway to Rome. And the battle lasted from the 17th of January to the 18th of May, 1944, and they were victorious. So it was great to see her. So go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of her speech here, which was essentially given to her by Charles to reflect.
On this 80th anniversary, let us pause to reflect on the immense sacrifices made by so many for the cause of freedom in Europe, perhaps ever more poignant today. Coming together to honour the fallen in this hallowed ground reminds us that the rights and freedoms we enjoy today were won at a great cost. Such sacrifice can never be forgotten. On behalf of my wife and myself, I send special warmest wishes and prayers on this solemn occasion of remembrance and commemoration. Charles R.
All right, guys, I think it's so amazing. And I really actually want to be in Europe next year for maybe even a couple of months because there will be so many celebrations and commemorations around the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Because I believe the end was in May 9th. I think it was a date. We have Remembrance Day in the Netherlands. It's always on May 4th. There's national days in Sweden. You have Norway. And I think there'll be a lot of celebrations and commemorations surrounding the 80th anniversary of World War II. So I think that'll be an incredible sight to see. And so we have these two, I feel like, shining beacons. And I also want to give a special shout out to Princess Madeline, who is going to be relocating to Sweden later this year after spending several years in the United States. She's doing this to keep her children within the line of succession, but she has really been able to, I think, show what a royal who leaves the institution, moves somewhere else, can still be. Because if you don't know, Madeline moved out of Sweden because at the initial time she did it, it was after a breakup of her engagement to her fiance. She found out he was cheating on her. She was sort of humiliated in Sweden. And there were so many stories because we think everybody just talks about the Brits. Oh, no, no, no. They talk about all the royals. We just don't see the publications quite as much because they're in a separate language. I actually spend some time, and I really need to look through them again, pulling out and buying a bunch of foreign editions of magazines covering royals because I just wanted to prove it exists everywhere. We just don't hear it. I can get some different stories and everything. So I did go ahead and do that last year, but Madeline moved to New York to sort of escape the fervor over the collapse of her relationship. She found a guy, married him, lived in New York for a while. Her first daughter, Leonore, was born in New York. They moved back to Sweden, then to London. Then maybe they went back to Sweden again before finally relocating more seriously to Florida for a couple of years. Her husband's in finance. And so they have sold their home and they are relocating back to Sweden. And she's doing this again, like I said, to keep her children in the line of succession. And I believe part of it is to keep their titles as well. It's part of the Swedish constitution, something I think all royal families should adopt because if the child who has a royal title is not raised or educated in the country where they hold the title, do they really deserve the title? I think that's a great question. And that is a question, of course, for Harry, Meghan, and their children, because we have these other royals who do a great job representing their country, even abroad. Because Princess Madeline, to go back to her, sometimes, usually like once every other month, once every 3 months, she will actually do an engagement in Florida on essentially behalf of Sweden. So she'll go to a Swedish church. She met with a Swedish astronaut, and she even attended a dinner at the Swedish embassy in Washington, D.C., where they were hosting some of the Nobel laureates because the Nobels are held in Sweden. If you did not know that. So she's able to do those things because she has a great relationship with her family. And of course, Harry and Meghan, that's not totally the case. And we have, and I want to do a larger video exploring this Harry and Meghan's cheap imitation of a royal tour. So Harry and Meghan obviously went to Nigeria recently, and it really is setting the precedence to the rest of the world. And I would argue, especially American audiences, about royal tours in a way that's just simply not true. They are a cheap imitation of royal tours. They're doing things royals would never do, like cavorting with a bunch of criminals, apparently, while Harry and Meghan were in Nigeria. They were spotted at least with two fraudsters, both who were wanted, I think, by the United States. And that wouldn't have happened on a royal tour. Yes, of course, sometimes royals meet with people that you're like, oh, why did they do that? But when it comes to royal tours, I feel like everybody is so incredibly vetted before meeting the royal that this kind of thing would usually be avoided. And you saw as well where Harry and Meghan on this particular tour, they were trying to do all the royal things, but offering nothing in return to Nigeria. So, if again, we will talk about this more when we talk about the state visits between Denmark and Sweden and Denmark and Norway. But when these countries come together, oftentimes there's either agreements that are made, trade deals, those sorts of things, because the royal brings with them power. Yes, they are a head of state, and so they are somewhat more of a figurehead. They are the face of the country. They don't make policy. So in the United States, our head of state is the person who also makes the policy, which is the president. So we have a bit of a different system. But because of who they are, because oftentimes they bring other diplomats and political figures with them, a royal tour can result in a lot of revenue for a country potentially. This, of course, doesn't happen in the case of Harry and Meghan because they can't offer anything. And this cheap imitation, unfortunately, becomes too often the narrative that people hear about their understanding of how royals function are determined by what they see more. And obviously, some of this is the result of William and Catherine, especially, and I think even Charles Camilla, being unable to tour much because of the king's cancer diagnosis. Because even though Sophie is going to Italy, Edward went to South Africa, and Sophie went to Ukraine, and Anne went to Canada, they just don't increase the attention on the monarchy the way Catherine and William and Charles and Camilla will. Charles and Camilla did go to France and Germany at separate points. It was supposed to be one tour, got broken up into two. But going to a Commonwealth country for Charles and Camilla, like Australia, Canada, would be really, really good right now because unfortunately, Catherine and William can't fulfill that role. And if you're curious, I believe Catherine will probably not be back until sometime in the fall. So I want to get your hopes up too much, but that's something to see. But Harry and Meghan have really damaged the monarchy by trying to replicate it in a cheap, tawdry fashion. But also, their Spare, Netflix, Spotify, the Oprah interview, other interviews calling the royal family essentially racist, dragging up ugly accusations, and so many things in between that have damaged Harry and Meghan's relationship, not only with their family, but also with the public overall, because they've remained two of the most unpopular royals. And there is a good reason for that. People don't like them because of their actions, because of what they've done. And so it's just something where they are continuing to damage the monarchy in many, many ways. And they show how not to be a royal abroad because, like we showed, Princess Madeline, though she lives in Florida, she can still act on behalf of the Swedish government essentially because she has a good relationship with them and her family. Harry and Meghan cannot. So when they attempt to do these things, it not only strikes us as, oh, we sort of seen that, it looks sort of familiar, but it also highlights celebrity. And that's what royals are not. They are not celebrities, they are royalty. And so the more Harry and Meghan do these kind of things, the more damaging it becomes. But they are not the only spare, because there was a recent article that came out that I really wanted to highlight about Prince Laurent of Belgium, because he is seemingly very, very upset that he's not the king of Belgium, even though he already knew that. Kind of knew that from the beginning. It's kind of how it works when you're the spare. So let's check it out. So, Prince Laurent, Belgium's a black sheep who was friends with Colonel Gaddafi and slammed the British royals over their unacceptable treatment of the Duke of Sussex, considering new life abroad after a string of business failures and gaffes. I love this. And I actually have heard this in other articles by someone. So I know most of these things are true. So, Laurent, known as the Cursed Prince, after a series of failed business ventures and gaffes, including that he likened life as a Belgian royal to living under a dictatorship. But you'll notice it's not living under a dictatorship. He just can't do everything he wants because if you are attached to the monarchy and you still continue to see yourself as a working royal, there are regulations and restrictions on that, like there are in any job. You can't just do whatever you want. Now he plans to leave the country. Laurent, who was a friend of Libyan dictator, Colonel Gaddafi, who was killed, told the Belgium outlet that I'm preparing a new life. And I think maybe the people of Belgium are breathing a sigh of relief. So this was him in particular at sort of their National Day celebrations on his phone. He's done this multiple times now. It's like you can't, you just feel petulant brat from the guy. And so it says, I would like to change my current positions. I want to be less involved in public activities. It's no secret that one day I want to live abroad in Italy. Oh, I'm sure you can do that. I'm sure you can do that. I don't think that would be that hard if you wanted to. He added, I don't compare myself to Prince Harry. I've always been an entrepreneur. Sure. But it is true that I would like to start a new life. And I think there is legitimate things to compare to him with Prince Harry. And we will go into how to really be a real spare because the reality is he has known since birth essentially that he would not be king, that he would not get everything you could say he wanted out of life because he is not king. This shouldn't be a great shock to him, yet it is. He recently complained as well that his human rights are being breached because he has to ask the government for permission if he wants to see Luxembourg's head of state, Grand Duke Henri, who is his cousin, because I think they probably don't want him messing up anything because I don't think they really trust him. The Aaron Prince recently said that he was so unhappy in Belgium, he once sought exile in Libya before Colonel Gaddafi's fall in 2011, which shows you where his head is at. Iran hopes to be more useful if he lives abroad. He said, I am convinced that I will be able to develop in that new life than in the life I am experiencing now. I can think I can do more for society and make myself more useful if I can live that new life. I'm not proclaiming this because I'm angry. Sometimes people say things that they're not when people didn't ask, which makes you think that, yes, you are angry because you need to say it because you think people are thinking it because you're thinking it. The prince recently headed up an environmental charity which planted trees in Libya to combat deforestation. Doesn't that sound like a good business opportunity? The organization lost up to 50 million euros when Gaddafi was toppled during the Arab Spring series of protests. This is him falling at an event. Like it how they have to do that to really drive things home. And so he married Claire, who his long suffering wife, and there are his children who look lovely. Look lovely. His daughter looks a lot like her mother, and you just got to wonder if Princess Claire is wondering at the end of the day, did I marry the right guy? Laurent went on to press the Belgian government to help him get compensation because he needs to be paid because he's an entrepreneur, but a failed one. He once questioned why he was so stigmatized and crushed. I'm very worried because there's not only a will to harm me, to harm my family, but to harm everyone who supports me. Does this sound a little bit like Harry? It sort of kind of does. 2019, he was told off by his wife, British born Princess Claire of Belgium, when he was pictured on his phone during an event celebrating his country's independence. And even as the national anthem was playing, you just got to look at this. You could just see her going, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then he did it again, the same in 2022. And he has also defended King Leopold II. There's a book entitled The Ghost of Leopold, Leopold's Ghost. And it's about, of course, the massive extreme abuse that the Belgian government on behalf of King Leopold inflicted on the people of the Congo in order to try to get rubber. He claimed that Leopold could not have made people suffer because he never visited his African country. Interesting to note, Adolf Hitler also actually never personally killed anybody, but we still attribute the death of 6 million Jews to Adolf Hitler and the death of millions upon millions, tens of millions of people across Europe during World War II. Just because you didn't actually do it doesn't mean you're not the one guilty. Obviously, the same thing would happen with Charles Manson, just saying. So, this is just something I wanted to highlight to everyone because we always think and we always focus on Harry so much, but let me be clear, there is a lot of spares who have issues with the fact that they won't be king. And again, should not be a surprise to this guy in the slightest. This has been the case since his birth. And I think this is the key to being a royal spare. How do you survive as the spare? So, first, you have to understand that the hierarchy exists and that no matter what you do, it will not change. So, don't drive yourself nuts thinking of what ifs, as nothing you do will change that reality unless you go medieval. If you don't go medieval, there ain't just nothing you can do to change it beyond an accident of some sort. So, the trick is to find a passion and orient your role to fulfilling it, however possible. Now, you have to be healthy and realistic here. There obviously, if the monarch or the heir has also that interest, you have to maybe take a step back from something and find something else. But every person should be able to establish a role in whatever institution. You just have to take some time to figure out what that's going to be and how that's going to look. But it can be totally possible. Princess Anne has done it. And she has just such an honor now of being basically one of the closest people to Charles, and one of the most key people during his tenure as king will be Princess Anne. I have no doubt. If it's better for you, perhaps then it's better just to leave. But also don't bite the hand that feeds you. Remain on good terms. Madeline, of course, has done this exceedingly well. She has left on her own terms. She decided, I don't really want to be a part of this rabbit race anymore, at least for a while, because obviously there's a lot of pressure on her within Sweden. She can live basically anonymously in Florida, with a few exceptions. Paparazzi pictures come out from time to time of her family, but she can basically be by herself. And you can do that. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided they wanted to do that, but they didn't do that right. They made demands that the monarchy couldn't meet. And they're still trying to act as if the Sandringham Accords didn't happen or they don't need to abide by them, which is totally not the case. So you can leave Prince Laurent if he wants to leave. I'm sure many Belgians were like, yay. But at the same time, you don't want to be the person either who continues to damage your relationship with the monarchy, because at the end of the day, usually you do kind of need it. And it's just best to be on good terms with members of your family. And then one of the last things is realize that as your importance diminishes within the context of the monarchy, don't let that depress you or anger you. Seek validation outside the institution and accept the things you cannot change. And it might even be possible that the older you get and the more selflessly you serve, the more you might be appreciated. There's a reason Sophie and Anne have the lowest unfavorability, and that is because they do their role. They're not trying to go outside it. They're trying to recognize that, yes, they have a lesser role, but that doesn't diminish them within the institution. In fact, they're some of its greatest assets. But you just have to work. You have to put your head down, and you can't be somebody who's constantly trying to punch above your station, which is what Harry and Meghan were trying to do. You can't punch above it because you just can't. There is somebody higher up in the hierarchy, and they knew that when they got married. When they married, Harry was the sixth in line. And I've said this before, but if every Wales's child, so George, Charlotte, and Louis, all have three children, Harry is knocked down to like 12th in line to the throne, and his kids lower than that, because that is what happens within a monarchy system. If you're not in that direct line, unfortunately, at some point, you just will kind of be bumped further on down. So that's just something to keep in mind. And as I was researching something else for this Crown report, I came across a great quote from George Boleyn, who was the brother to Anne Boleyn. He says, beware, trust not in the vanity of the world or the flatteries of the court or the favor and treacheries of fortune. Because this is a trap I think so many even spares fall into. They are flattered, there's money, they receive all these favors, and they forget that because they are not the heir, they have to be maybe a bit more cautious in how they deal with things, and that some of these things are fleeting. So, best to put your best foot forward, best to find either a job or a role that really does fulfill you, but also as well doesn't punch you too outside where you can go, because that is the trick. And yes, that is going to be hard. But let's get over to the state visit between Denmark and Sweden and Denmark and Norway, because I wanted to highlight this because obviously so many people have talked about the Harry and Meghan Nigeria tour. And I wanted to show you what a real royal tour kind of looks like. And one of the first things I wanted to highlight is how the hierarchy works, because I think some people don't really appreciate this, don't really seem to care about it. But hierarchy is key in royal circles, because whoever is king, they are the most important. And then down the line, you get more or less important depending. So let's take a look at this and how this was reflected in Sweden for the Danish state visit. So, to begin, we have King Frederick getting off the ship first, followed by Queen Mary. And the first person he greets is not Prince Daniel, but Crown Princess Victoria, because she's blood royal. So, let's take a look here. So, he greets, and there we go. And she gives the curtsy, and then he goes on to greet the next. And then we got this lovely curtsy yet again, and greeting the two there as well. So I love that, because again, it shows that there is a close relationship. A hierarchy doesn't mean that you can ignore the precedents here in this situation, because you even see this here. King Frederick and Crown Princess Victoria go first as the blood royals, and then their married in follows behind them. And we see this again even in how they get on the ship. Frederick first, followed by Mary. Then followed by Victoria, not because she is a woman, but because she is a blood royal, and then followed by Victoria's husband. Again, and we see this here in Norway as well. King Frederick helps Mary get off the ship, but then he goes and greets everyone first, and he greets in Crown Princess Mette-Marit first, which is a little bit of a surprise since he should probably greet Crown Prince Khan first, but here we go. And so very sweet. So you got the king and crown prince, the ladies follow behind. And again, the order would be reversed if one of the ladies was actually the blood royal. So here he greets King Harold, and then they greet Queen Sonia. And the king, of course, goes first there. And we have this here back in Sweden. We have again the ladies following the husbands and then the crown princess behind. Because I think there's so much confusion over what royals do because Harry and Meghan just, I think, just offer this very celebritized reflection of royalty without actually seeing what royals actually do and how they function. So I do just love this state visit. Again, I love that the order of precedence and everything. Yes, it might seem archaic to some, but it does remain the same. It's something that does not change. So here they are in Stockholm greeting the crowd. I think Mary looks absolutely lovely there. You got King Frederick, you got the King of Sweden. So here we are back in Sweden for them to greet the official government officials. Now, I will say, and let me look back here at this video because I've actually been in this room, but I think I was from maybe the opposite side. I think this was inside the courtyard of the palace because if you go to the stairway on the opposite side, I believe you get to the royal chapel of the palace in Stockholm. But if you go this direction, you get into this greeting room that we will see here in a minute. And so, again, like I said, the key part of royal roles is meeting other government officials and strengthening the bonds between two countries. And so, you here have many the prime minister, the head of parliament, the head of various parties within the country. Those are the people on the greeting line. And you have military officials as well. You'll see on the tail end there. That is who King Frederick is meeting. He's not just meeting officials, these are members of the government. And so they have prominent roles or the military. And we will see how the military relations between the two countries was strengthened during this visit. And so not only the king, but the queen also goes around and greets everyone. And so they're also told who individual people are. Now, I don't know who the people on the opposite side are because I recognize a couple of people on the previous side, but these might be in addition to like cultural leaders. We might have a lot of Danish officials here as well. And yes, Danish officials, because it looked like, at least in some instances, the King of Sweden was going first, when in the previous round, it was the King of Denmark going first. So I imagine on the opposite side, we have some of the representatives of the, let's say, the embassy there in Sweden. And they're obviously very close countries. So it's an opportunity to connect and grow these bonds. So they're going off to continue their royal visit here. Again, there's a lot of pomp and ceremony here, not quite as much as the Brits, but I do think these are always really, really fun and enjoyable to actually go later here and give a little bit of a press conference where they share each of their thoughts about their respective countries and the roles that they play. And we'll get back to this later, but the brooch Mary is wearing is actually quite special and again shows the bonds between these two countries, which we'll get to here in a little bit. So this is them. They're meeting with the Riksdagens, who was the Speaker of the House. We also have the Swedish Prime Minister here that they are meeting with as well, Ulf Kristersson. And then here we are in Norway, and they are doing an official lunch here with the Prime Minister of Norway and other government officials. And so this is them arriving. They're given a little treat by a military band here. The rest of the Norwegian royals are also in attendance. And before that, they met with Norway's parliament president, Masud Gharahkhani. And then there's the prime minister, Jonas Gahr Store. And then I believe I included a picture here of the rest of the royals as well. So we have Crown Prince Haakon and Mette-Marit also in attendance here. And I imagine some Danish officials as well who are accompanying them. And then there's the entire royal family with the Prime Minister of Norway. Because again, these are all about connecting these family relationships, but also the strengthening the bonds between two countries. So they go and meet with many of the top officials there. So, especially in the state visit between Sweden and Denmark, we have this additional aspects of a military visit. So, here we have the two kings in fatigues. And they are there at the Singborg ship, it looks like behind them. And the purpose there is to strengthen the military ties because of the threat that Russia poses, particularly in their region. It behooves them as much as possible to create military alliances. We see this reflected here. And two representatives, one from Sweden and one from Denmark, they are signing actually a defense cooperation agreement between the two countries on the HMS Helsingborg, and the defense ministers were the ones signing this. So, yes, the monarchs are there, but this is really about the defense ministers too, because there is a risk that cannot be avoided. And the purpose of royalty is not just to strengthen the bonds like culturally, but there's a military aspect too. State visits are also done to highlight some of the cultural aspects of the various countries. We have the royals here at City Hall. They're about to meet with members again of the government there in Stockholm. But this is a great opportunity too. You see, they do this picture in front of the harbor line of Stockholm, which is incredibly, incredibly beautiful. Again, highlighting the country for those who might be interested in visiting, because an additional benefit of royals going to a foreign country and bringing a lot of attention is that countries might see a bump in tourism. And you can see Stockholm is beautiful. If you haven't been, highly recommend. And they also went to the at Prince Eugen's Wald Marsud in stock as well. And we did this a little bit more here in Norway. So you see the royal couples there are about to head out on a hike around a lake that surrounds Oslo. Highlight how Oslo in many ways is trying to keep, even though it's a big city, trying to keep nature first and foremost and trying to highlight great ways that people can get out and have activities and everything. And you can see it's a gorgeous day out there in the sunshine. We have obviously, because of King Harold's mobility issues, he couldn't accompany them, but we do have Crown Prince Haakon and Mette-Marit there who are accompanying their friends and distant cousins, King Frederick and Queen Mary of Denmark. And they're sharing their thoughts there with the press. And they also got this tour of sort of downtown Oslo, which I thought was really, really fun. I love, in particular, Mary's outfit here. It's very casual, chic, and I think works exceptionally well. So they gathered a bit of a crowd too as they went around, but they got to learn more about Oslo, and you see more of the Oslo harbor just really makes you want to go visit the country. And so, and it highlights as well their connection to the culture and everything there in Oslo. So I think this is something where so many people are like, yes, this is great. This makes me want to visit because again, not everybody can get everywhere. But if you highlight just not only practical applications, but some of the fun things too, you can encourage more people, even Danes, to go and visit their northern neighbor there. And we have the doing a little bit of a photo op there around their 20th anniversary, which was the day before. Oh, doesn't that look gorgeous? Doesn't that make you want to go to Norway? Right now, I just really want to go to Norway. It looks absolutely amazing. That harbor shot there is incredible. That's beautiful. But look at that. Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. And so that is a crucial part of royal visits as well. But we get to my most exciting part here in a second. And that is, of course, the jewelry. Now, here we have something very, very special. I want to highlight Queen Mary's there brooch. She is in the white there, and she has this sapphire brooch, which is called the Konat brooch. It was made for Crown Princess Margaret of Sweden, who was born Margaret of Connaught. So she's actually from Britain. So she is the great grandmother to the current king of Sweden and the great grandmother to the current king of Denmark. And so Mary wearing this brooch here signifies and highlights that relationship. So we can see it a bit here in this picture. I was trying to get some video, but I couldn't get some great video or pictures on it. But we did get one close up here in a second that you guys can check out and see sort of the detail here in this gorgeous, gorgeous brooch. And it was something that was given to, at the time, Crown Princess Mary by her mother in law, Queen Marguerite of Denmark. And she gave it to her on the occasion of her first son, now Crown Prince Christian. So it just signifies the relations between the two countries. We have the sapphire there, some pearls and diamonds too. And so highlighting that relationship is through oftentimes jewelry, because jewelry is really cool, because tiaras and jewels, yes, they sparkle and they're magnificent. But the really awesome thing about it as well is that there's a tie between definitely centuries of family tradition and heritage that often run through these pieces of jewelry because some of them are hundreds of years old. We see this here reflected in the tiara Mary chose. It is actually she inherited from Queen Ingrid, who was born a princess of Sweden. This is King Frederick's grandmother. She left that tiara to him for the future crown princess. She unfortunately passed away before he met his future wife, Mary. But she gets to wear it now and reflects again that connection in the history. We also have the Loschenberg sapphire tiara being worn here by Queen Sylvia of Sweden. And this tiara has a connection that's very special to actually Queen Mary's tiara because they're both from technically connected to the court of Napoleon. And I do want to highlight the photographers going in. I just think that's interesting. And so this tiara that Mary is wearing was originally commissioned for actually the coronation of Emperor Napoleon. And then the Loschenberg sapphire tiaras were probably given to the Princess of Loschenberg by actually Emperor Napoleon. And the tiara Crown Princess Victoria is wearing there that you can see kind of being sort of out of focus there on the side is called the Connaught tiara. And so again, connected Margaret of Connaught, which is connected to all the royals. But getting back to the Loschenberg sapphires, so they were given to her by the Emperor Napoleon, who was technically her stepfather. Her mother was Empress Josephine. And so she ended up with these sapphire jewelry, and they ended up making their way up to the court of Sweden at her death because I don't think she had anybody to give it to, or her daughter had married the king of Sweden. So I can't quite remember. But they made their way up to Sweden. And so now the Sweden has those. So again, it reflects that connection to the court of Napoleon. There's some of her more older pieces of jewelry here. And the Loschenberg connection, I believe, connects maybe even back to the ruby tiara as well. But don't think that's necessarily the case there. But the Connaught there is reflected of the relationship between these two countries and the connection and the history there and their shared ancestor, Margaret of Connaught. And so it's lovely to see Crown Princess Victoria wearing that. And I love this shot here because you can just see the back of Mary's necklace. And here we have Mary in Norway wearing the Pearl Poirier tiara. And this one has seen many, many occasions here in Norway, and it was worn for the wedding of King Harold of Norway and his wife, now Queen Sonja. And it was worn to a previous royal wedding there in Norway as well. And so Mary is bringing that back, reflecting again that shared history there. And I have a whole series of information on the Pearl Poirier tiara. And the tiara that Queen Sonja is wearing, I believe, also has connections way back in time to Sweden as well, and the connections between Sweden and Denmark. And so this one started off its life, the Proprier started off its life in the Netherlands and eventually made its way to Sweden and then eventually made its way to Denmark. So it is one of Mary's most impressive pieces now that she is queen. And it's one of the few that can actually leave the country. Some of the other ones cannot, like the emerald tiara, cannot leave the country because it's part of the crown jewels. And so I just think she looks lovely here. It kind of gives you a reflection of, you could say, the Cambridge or the Queen Mary's Lovers Knot. People still call it the Cambridge. It's technically the Queen Mary's Lovers Knot. So it gives you echoes of that as well. So it was just so fun to see them, of course, bust out those pieces of jewelry. We also have King Charles getting back to work here. Here he is at St. Paul's Cathedral for the Order of the British Empire ceremony there with his wife, Queen Camilla, who I believe was just inducted into this particular society. And so, according to reports, he is so anxious to get back to work. According to the Times, he has been frustrated because there is still so much he wants to achieve. He holds himself to very high standards of public service and genuinely feels he's letting people and organizations down if he's not out there doing all those public bits of his formal role. Another friend told the Times and gave a bit of a blunter assessment, saying he's a bloody cage lion, driving everyone around the twist if he's stuck at home. So he officially returned to light duties a couple of weeks ago after doctors cleared him to return to work. Though he has been undertaking some private engagements, his public duties have been essentially non existent. And so they are slowly building that up over time. And he has also embraced hundreds of new patronages. And the other thing that people are most talking about is, of course, his new portrait, which seems a little bit more reminiscent of Game of Thrones than the British monarchy, which was partly inspired by the Game of Thrones. But this new painting by Jonathan Yeo is causing a lot of controversy. He started it before he became king, and he sat for the last bit of painting in 2023. And so we see his face clearly, but the blood red, which reflects his Wales Guards uniform, may have been a bit much. But King Charles still looks good. He's doing out garden parties. And I think more and more he's connecting with the British people. His popularity is pretty solid. And so this is just, again, a wonderful thing to see. We also have Prince William out and about in his duchy. He was in Newquay in Cornwall to oversee the new construction that's happening for his Homewards program, which is focused on addressing the issue of homelessness. It's something he announced, I believe it was last year. And he also went on to visit the Isles of Sicily. And he did share with people when asked that Catherine is doing well. And she also recently reviewed a report for her early years project, which we'll probably go into more detail next time, though do not expect her to return until the fall, most likely. He also attended a recent conference on antimicrobial resistance as part of his role as a patron of the Fleming Institute. Apparently, the dangers of microbial resistance, which means that we take so many antibiotics, we become resistant to their effects, is something that he has cared for passionately about for years. He has also launched a new program to help the mental health of farmers in the Duchy of Cornwall. The idea is to provide a mental health hotline 24/7 for farmers for the next 3 years. It's part of a funding package that will support We Are Farming Minds, a charity organization founded by a farmer named Sam Stables and his wife Emily. He founded the organization after struggling with his own mental health. I think there is a statistic that there's a decent amount of farmers that commit suicide every year. And since inheriting the duchy, Prince William has been determined to change how it functions and making his own mark on it. He also, when visiting the Isles of Sicily, told the people, keep flagging anything else that we can do. He told them, I'm hoping to do more down here when you guys want it. We have got to work to do better. I don't have all the answers, but I'm just trying to learn my way around and work out what needs doing. And I just think that's a fantastic sentiment for William to have. It's just great to say, I can help. I want to help. Tell me what to do, and I will do it. I will figure out. I don't have all the answers, but we will figure this out. And again, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Prince William also recently took over for his father as Colonel in Chief of the Royal Air Corps. And so this is an exciting opportunity for Prince William, especially because a lot of the focus is on helicopters. And as we all know, Prince William is an expert at flying helicopters. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but he is a helicopter pilot. He flew air ambulance for several years. And so King Charles is giving up this Army Air Corps role to his son. So take a listen to a little bit of his speech about his time with the unit here.
I did just want to say what a great joy it is to be with you, even briefly, on this occasion, but also tinged with great sadness after 32 years of knowing you all and admiring all your many activities and your achievements. I watched with, again, immense admiration for what you did and managed to do. Having had the pleasure of knowing you for so long, I do hope you'll go from strength to strength in the future with the Prince of Wales as your new Colonel-in-Chief. The great thing is he's a very good pilot indeed, so that's encouraging.
So it was lovely to see Charles's love for this unit and how William is trying to embrace it as well. Here he's in army fatigues. He's going out to one of the helicopters to take a bit of a spin in it and show off some of his impressive piloting skills. There they are in front of an Apache helicopter, and he wanted to leave, but they were like, oh no, stand there and pose by yourself. So he got in here to the pilot seats of an Apache, which I'm sure is a little bit different than what he usually pilots. And he ends up getting some great assistance there from one of the members of the military who shares with him what to do. And they end up taxiing out and they end up taking off there a bit later. So I'm so excited William is taking over this role and so exciting to see Charles give his son just such an incredible honor. We also have King Frederick and Queen Mary celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary, but not without controversy. As some people are reading into the recent royal run, which we will cover more in depth next time. But in this event, it seems like Mary is congratulating other participants and not really her husband. So, if you are not aware, King Frederick last year was caught going seemingly, now this is just a general description. He went to Spain, met up with a friend who was a woman. They went to an art exhibit, then went to dinner. Then he stayed overnight at her house and then he went home. So many people were wondering and trying to figure out exactly what happened. There was some obvious tension between Frederick and Mary when the story broke. And so many people are wondering if the two, how well they were doing. So, in light, I feel like it's totally magnified in the media. And it's interesting to consider. I've heard through the grapevine over years, but I won't don't want to say this specifically because I don't really know, but that Frederick and Mary, that things have always been simpatico between the two. But I do want to say that every marriage goes through a bit of a rough patch time to time. And this year has obviously been somewhat of a surprise because they did not know they were to be inheriting the throne until 3 days before Queen Marguerite's announcement. This was not something she really let the family know about. And so I'm sure they're still sort of somewhat reeling from everything. Definitely, it could be a possibility that the couple are somewhat struggling in their relationship. But at this point, too, don't read too much into things either because things can change quickly or things are maybe not always what they seem. We don't have the video for this yet. So we also have Constitution Day in Norway, which is May 17th. It's in honor of the Norwegian Constitution, which was signed in Eidsvoll on May 17th, 1814. So at this point, Norway was established as an independent country and it avoided being ceded to Sweden after the defeat of Denmark and Norway after the Napoleonic Wars. And so a big part of this celebration are children's parades where kids from all over the country march together. And I think they make sort of various signs and people dress in different outfits and they make various stops along the way. And we saw this reflected in the royal family because they spotted their son, Sverre Magnus, who was celebrating with his classmates because he had finished secondary school. And funnily enough, on Instagram Translate for the Norwegian page, it said that he was walking with part of his litter. So I just thought that was really funny. Had to add that. I think everybody looked amazing. And Ingrid Alexander, who's serving a year in the military, she wore her military uniform for the second half of the day. But at the beginning, they began waving to the children as part of the children's parade in their traditional Norwegian dress, which I love that they have that. I love that they have that. Okay, so next we have King Felipe and Queen Letizia of Spain observing the bicentennial of the National Police and the Royal Palace. So King Philippe reviewed the troops, presented the Order of Constitutional Merit to the National Police. So they've been around for 200 years now. There was also a special tribute to military men who had died in the line of duty. The motto of the National Police, if you do not know, is engaged to you. And my particular favorite moment is the dog riding on the car because I don't think he's too happy about that. So I do feel a little bit sorry for him. But he does it well. And one of the things I actually really wanted to point out here is that Queen Letizia has moved to wearing simply sneakers now. She's having a lot of issues with her feet. She has Morton's neuroma and something else as well. And so these are just getting worse and worse. We saw things sort of decrease from high heels to kitten heels. And now it seems like sneakers are what she's utilizing. Because I think in any other situation, she would be wearing heels. But unfortunately, it's become too painful. And so that is no longer what she's doing. And moving over to Belgium, we have Princess Elizabeth to study at Harvard. So she is the Duchess of Brabant, future Queen of Belgium, and she's going to Harvard to complete a 2 years master's degree in public policy. This will provide her with a good foundation for her future role as Queen. As I would say, a lot of the job of a royal has similarities to public policy in some ways. Her cousin, Prince Joachim, has also studied at Harvard. Her father went and studied at Stanford. She is currently finishing up her studies at Oxford University before heading over to her new program in Boston later this summer. Princess Catherine Amalia, the future queen of the Netherlands, will start taking her government salary in 2025. In 2021, when she turned 18, Amalia officially declined her government salary, refunding it essentially to them as she received it, as she was studying in university and not intending on fulfilling royal duties. However, things have changed. According to her official letter, and Google Translate. With the passage of time and after surprising circumstances, she was under threat. So she actually had to leave her university and was studying in Madrid for a time. It is now foreseeable that I will have to take into account personal and material expenses with a view to an independent fulfillment of my position, including a secretariat and reservations for a living and working accommodations. For this reason, I will no longer refund the constitutional expense allowance B component from January 1, 2025. I'll, of course, continue to pay back the income until the end of my studies. So it looks like she is about to finish up there and she will start doing more royal duties. And I have to say, I'm very excited about that because I think Catherine Amalia is lovely. So we have a couple of quick things here, real quick. Prince William will serve as usher for the Duke of Westminster's wedding on June 7th. Trooping the color will occur on June 15th. The king will attend, but he will take a carriage and not ride on horseback. I also have to say, my theory is that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, may make an appearance on the balcony for the fly past that usually only lasts less than probably 8 minutes. So I think that's something she could do. The public would be far away. And she could, if she's feeling well enough, if she feels like she looks well enough, do something like that to sort of alleviate public concerns. And I feel like make all the crazy people still asking, where is Catherine, feel again very bad about themselves. National Day in Sweden is June 6th. King Charles and Queen Camilla and Prince William will attend memorial services to remember D-Day in Normandy, France. June, we also have Royal Ascot. And like I said, for anniversaries, we have King Frederick and Queen Mary were married on May 14th, 2004, and King Philippe and Queen Letizia were married on May 22nd, 2004. So I'm really bummed I was not watching Royals as closely then and had this channel because I bet you bottom dollar because those weddings are so close together, I would be there and covering both of them. We also have some birthdays as well. Queen Maxima turned 53 on May 17th. Prince Carl Philip turned 45 on May 13th. Prince Charles of Luxembourg, the future Grand Duke of Luxembourg, turned the grand total of 4 on May 10th. And Zara Phillips turned 43 on May 15th. And so just to look back on this date in history in particular, on May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn, the queen of King Henry VIII, was executed. She was convicted of adultery and plotting against the king, along with some co-conspirators on May 15th, so a very short time period, including brother who was alleged to have committed incest with Anne. The trial that they concocted to convict her was sort of a sham trial created by Henry and Thomas Cromwell. She had only been queen for about 3 years when she was sent to the Tower, where she had also awaited her coronation. Famously, it was for love of Anne that Henry broke from the Catholic Church and risked war with his first wife, Catherine of Aragon's Spanish family, in order to marry Anne. But unfortunately for her, she could not bear a son and only a daughter. She also had a series of miscarriages, seeming to Henry to confirm that she was misfortunate, and quickly became a source of ire for Henry, whose eyes had wandered to Jane Seymour. Given that she was queen, she was allowed a small mercy, which was that she would be executed by a professional swordsman and not an axe, which was the usual for an executioner, who was often drunk and usually missed on the first strike, which increased the pain and trauma of the condemned. Catherine of Howard was not extended the same courtesy years later. On the eve of her execution, Anne joked, "I heard the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck." She tried to demonstrate to the constable of the Tower before descending into a fit of laughter. Though initially scheduled to be executed on Tower Green, she was technically beheaded on a scaffold to the north of the White Tower, which was witnessed by hundreds as the gates were not closed. According to the National Archives of the UK, tours around the tower will probably still reference Tower Green, but the modern version we have is much smaller than the original, so it would be appropriate to say Tower Green, but it's not technically where the Tower Green is now. I was a little confused by it because I was reading about that because they were saying it was essentially in the same spot, but it wasn't at the same time, and I was like, okay, a little confusing. But I thought that was an interesting tidbit from the National Archives. On the scaffold, she protested her innocence as she was the queen and Henry and Cromwell wanted to contain the fallout from executing a queen. She was not executed outside the Tower where they usually did the executions. She remains a controversial figure, often portrayed as a temptress or a religious reformer. Anne Boleyn remains one of the most fascinating figures within English history because if you read about her, it was kind of interesting because she was actually pretty zealot in her Protestantism and she sort of very much encouraged Henry to go down that path. So she is very much responsible not only for the divorce, but overall for the English move to Protestantism. So, guys, that is it for this edition of the Crown Report. Thank you so much for tuning in. And let me know what more royal news you would like to see, what other historical events maybe we want to cover here real quickly at the end. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you soon. Bye.